Hello, and welcome to the Oregon Business Matters podcast, brought to you by Oregon Business and Industry, your statewide chamber of commerce. At Oregon Business Matters, we talk about insights, issues, and initiatives that impact Oregonians' shared prosperity and our state's economic health. I'm Angela Wilhelms, the president and CEO of OBI, and your host here at Oregon Business Matters. Today, I have the privilege of sitting down with Scott Hamlin, an apparel industry veteran who founded Looptworks in 2009. We're here at the Looptworks offices and facility, a company that is committed to circularity, which, in simple terms, refers to the reuse of materials that otherwise would go to waste. So I think that's something we can all get behind. The company takes excess or used clothing or other textiles, transforming them into thread or yarn that can be reused by apparel manufacturers, or nonwoven fibers that can be used in the production of insulation or other non-clothing products. Looptworks does all of this from its relatively new 90,000 square foot facility in Gresham, and I will let Scott tell us more about the details in all of that. I want to first congratulate Scott before I put him on the spot, though. In late January, Looptworks achieved a fantastic and extraordinary milestone. They received their Global Recycled Standard certification, which is a big deal. So we'll talk about that and also the company's fascinating evolution in its 17 years. I also will point out that Scott was recognized a few years ago with OBI's Visionary Award, our association's highest honor, for his ingenuity and commitment to sustainability embodied here at Looptworks. So with all of that, let's get to it. Thank you, Scott, for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Angela. I'm very happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
Okay. Well, this is fascinating, and we just spent some time walking around this facility, so congratulations on moving in and everything that you guys have accomplished. I look forward to filling our listeners in on where you're at.
Yeah, thanks.
Before we talk about Looptworks itself and the product and the processes that you've evolved and developed, let's just start with you. Tell me a little bit about your history in the apparel industry and what motivated you to go on this journey.
So first of all, I'll go to the Wayback Machine. I'm actually a native Oregonian.
Excellent.
So I did grow up here in the state and Junction City, Oregon, actually, right outside of Eugene.
Very good.
My pathway on this started actually as an athlete. I was an athlete. I was a pole vaulter and a decathlete, and did that at the University of Oregon, and then went into the athletic and outdoor industry, taking a job with Adidas to start my career. And my career was basically about 10 years with Adidas in a bunch of different roles, and then moved into outdoor as an industry because I really loved playing outside and all the outdoor activities that you do there. And it was really in that role that I kind of had one of those or existential crises, one of the two, where I started to realize that the products that we were making for the outdoor arena were encouraging people to go outside and play. Were actually damaging the areas we wanted them to go out and play in from an environmental standpoint. And so that was one of those crisis moments where I said I can either be part of this problem or part of the solution. And the thing that really bugged me the most was the waste that I was seeing happening throughout the industry. And, growing up here in Oregon, I remember getting my Keep Oregon Green sticker in 5th grade when I cleaned the ditch out in front of the house. And, that kind of got rebirthed, or it had been nascent for a long time and came back. And it was simple to me that waste is not something that we should be really just okay with. And if there's a solve for this, I saw it in a small outdoor company as an operator and said, if we're doing this, everybody's doing this. If everybody's doing this, we have a major problem. So that's kind of how I started into the industry. Had a good career with the industry, and then decided that I would try and help the industry. And that's when Looptworks was born. Yeah,
and I think that story is so fascinating because it's not uncommon that people find themselves in an industry and then see something in it and are like, oh, I can actually add value in a totally different way that I didn't even know was a thing when I started. And so to take that leap and have the courage to say, okay, I'm gonna try this from a different angle. But you're still sort of in that space from that new angle. The other thing I think that's interesting about what you said and what you guys do here is, you're right. It makes all the environmental health and sense in the world to try to reduce waste. That is obvious, especially when you say it the way you did. It actually also makes economic sense to reduce waste if you are a manufacturer or a producer of some sort. And so I think where you sit now is this very interesting space where there are these sort of dual motivations that are hopefully going to drive some continued innovation and growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's actually a third leg to that stool as well, which is supply chain resiliency. And that's why a lot of our customers are coming to us today and if you look at the textile industry, really boiling it down to the two basic materials, it's oil and water. It's water to grow cotton and oil to make polyester. And as an industry, those are our two largest materials that we use. And cotton is dramatically reducing in the amount of footprint that it has for growth, because a lot of it's being replaced by agriculture for food. And on the other side, we have the ups and downs of petroleum and oil and wondering if that is the right solution long term. And so when you start to look at these things, the recycling of the materials that are already on the planet becomes a resource. And that drives an economic incentive, and it also provides the environmental incentive as well.
Yeah, that is very well said. Okay, so a little bit about the company. Looptworks has been a company for 17 years now.
That's right.
Or you are in your 17th year, perhaps. And in that time, you've actually really almost been two different companies. We talked about this a little bit earlier. I mean, the end goal was always kind of the same. But tell us a little bit about the first wave of Looptworks and kind of the what you started as and what you grew, and then we'll get into what you're doing today.
Yeah, this all really started when I was in the outdoor company, and I kept getting the invoices at the end of the season for our excess fabric liability, which was everything that we asked a manufacturer to make for us for a sample or a production run that we'd already forecasted, and we didn't end up using it. For a myriad of reasons. And that was the aha moment for me, was saying, if we're not using this, nobody else is using this, where's it going? And so when you started to look at that waste stream, I knew in my mind, I said, well, I grew up in Oregon. This is like the bottle bill. Why can't we have a t-shirt bill, right? How come you can't have something that says, hey, we're going to take all these materials back and we're going to turn them back into the original material and then make that product again. And so that was the kind of thus the name Looptworks was, hey, we were looking at how do we make this into a full closed loop. And when we started, the technologies were not there. There was no technology to turn a t-shirt back into a t-shirt. So we said, okay, well, what can we do? And the immediate thing we could do was intercept the excess materials that I was sending to landfill and incineration by just sending a check to the factory for what our excess liability was, and they were just burning it or throwing it away. And so I said, let's start intercepting those materials and do something with them. And so we started with what's called upcycling, and we were the first company to pioneer upcycling in the textile space at scale. And that basically meant that we were taking those excess materials, turning them into new products, and commercializing the products. And that was really the goal of that, was to start a conversation with people and say, hey, where do your products come from? How much do you know about your materials? We'll tell you the story of where this came from. And then, it started out with the pre-consumer stuff at the factories, and then it was post-consumer, and then it went outside of that into, wetsuit material and aviation airline seats. And so we had some really big programs with some really big partners that allowed us to start to tell a story of what circularity could look like. And at the same time, it allowed us to establish a brand, establish a name, and grow a business and actually practice what we were doing. Like, okay, what happens when somebody has a whole bunch of waste and you have to take it in? How do you deal with it? And where does it go? How do you use it? So all the things that seem like, they in theory sound like really simple steps, there's a lot of logistics and operations behind that we really wanted to get good at. But in that evolution, I always thought to myself, hey, I think we'll be able to upcycle for about 10 years, and then our brand partners are going to kind of want to do it on their own. And I was okay with that. One of our first customers was Patagonia, and they now do their own upcycling programs and worn wear, and I'm really proud that we kind of pushed them in that direction. But I also knew, okay, now we got to keep going. We got to keep innovating.
Prepared for that, yeah.
And so as the technology started to evolve, that's where we've moved into kind of our second life back in 2024 when we started moving towards the full circularity model that we have today.
So I think that's a fascinating start to the company. And now tell us a little bit about how you've evolved in these last few years and where you're headed today, because I think it's natural once you hear it, a natural progression, but it's a really fascinating evolution.
Yeah, and it is a big jump. But if you looked at it from the thought process was as we start to move into, there's kind of two things. One of them is that we had customer demand. So we had customers coming to us going, we love upcycling with you, but we have this little amount of material that we want to upcycle with you because that means we have to buy product back from you. But we have a whole lot of material we want to get rid of. What do we do with that? And so there was that piece of it. And then there was this other piece of it that even creating upcycled products for me at that moment seemed like I'm just making more stuff and trying to sell it. So there was settling those two things and looking at it and going, hey, I think if Looptworks can be a critical part of a supply chain that helps get materials that are being wasted back into the supply chain where people are actually making products instead of being another one making products, that's a better place to be. So that was all the thinking that went into it. And from there, I told some of our customers, I said, I'm working on this. I was in advanced research and innovation at Adidas for a while. And I said, I'm working on this circularity thing. And they said, well, what do you need to do that? And I said, a little bit of money and a little bit of material. And so they obliged, and we were able to start to go out and do the research. And it was kind of kicking the ball up the field because we're still running the upcycling business, but it was kind of on the sidelines a little bit. And from that research, it informed what we then created, which is called the Loop system. And we now have a patent pending on that, and it's through provisional on that. So we should be getting issued pretty soon.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We're really excited about that part.
A very frameable thing for the lobby.
There you go. And within that, we created the system, and we really looked at the system holistically within the supply chain itself and the waste process. And that's how we designed the system was looking at that. And it became a technology platform where we could have multiple different technologies under one roof. And we knew we had certain key things we had to do. One of them was small footprint, low overhead. The other one is that every piece of fiber that came out of our building had to be on par with virgin costs. It couldn't be more expensive. So that's how we built the model, was really looking at those two things and taking in the economic considerations and the logistical and operations side of it. So all of that stuff that we did for the previous, ended up being about 14 years of upcycling, really, really was worth us doing it because it informed everything about the system that we've designed today.
Yeah, it's very cool. So we'll walk through it a little bit. First, where do you get your inputs?
Yeah, so there's...
And what are those inputs?
Yeah, so our inputs are textiles. So any kind of textile, and we can take multiple different types of textiles. That's what makes us unique. And within that, they come from a myriad of different places. They come from manufacturing. They come from brands with obsolete inventory and returns. They come from things that have been used in the industrial or commercial range, so think hospitals and hotels and places like that. And then they come from regular individuals that we aren't currently accepting those materials, but that's where materials come from. You think about what you would take to Goodwill. A lot of times people are now starting to look at that and say, hey, we'd like to get this recycled.
Yeah, that's great. And then we're going to skip over the what you do with it for a second. And then where does it go when you're done reprocessing it and recycling it? What is the output then used for? Because you're now a B2B business. You used to be a consumer products business, and now it's business to business. And so what are the types of businesses using your end product?
Yeah, and that was one of the key things that helped us make the jump, I think, is because we did do a lot of B2B work with the upcycling. Because a lot of brands were contacting us going, hey, we have these materials, we don't know what to do with them. And so that became more of a B2B transaction that helped us flow into what we're doing from a commercialization side. Didn't feel quite as different.
That makes sense.
Didn't as quite as foreign. But what we end up with are two types of fiber. Fiber is kind of the baseline for creating clothing or any sort of textile. And so the fibers that we sell, we have engineered a process that allows us to get to spinning fiber, which is really unique. And that spinning fiber can then go back into the supply chain to create a yarn that then creates a material that then creates a product.
Yeah.
And then on the other side of that, we have some things that come through. Not everything is really designed really well and perfect for circularity. There's some things that are not ready for prime time. So we put those into things like what's called the nonwoven market. So it goes into insulation. It can go into acoustic tiles, stuffing, filling, lots of different categories there.
Okay, so the middle step, we talked about your inputs and your outputs.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask you to give away any of your patent pending process secrets, but just at a high level, walk people through kind of what you're doing with these materials to transform them and make them ready again.
Yeah. So as things come into our building, you can imagine that it's this is a little bit of a messy business, right? Because you have different types of materials coming in, and you have things that are not friendly to our system, like zippers and buttons and snaps and whoever knows what else is in there. And so we run through a sorting process and a deconstruction process. Today that's manual. In the future it will be automated. We have a system in our patent that has AI and robotics behind it that will help us do that. And then we really go through a process of homogenizing our feedstock and then opening materials back up into their fiber form. And
I think that's an interesting phrase too. Just because this is not the world that I'm in.
Yeah.
But that is exactly what you're doing, as you showed me step by step on the floor in your facility today. You really are kind of tearing it apart and opening it back up to its raw state. And it's when you're just wearing a T-shirt, you certainly don't. At its core, it comes from a cotton or something like that. But you don't think about it because you just don't. You see it in such a different end result. But it really is the opening up of that material. That's a great phrasing.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we do. Is it's each one of those little yarns that goes in to make that T-shirt has to be reopened to get to the fiber form, and then that allows us to put it back into a yarn. If you were, as it's knitted together or woven together, it gets stuck in a static position of like that's what it is. So you have to deconstruct down to that opening piece of it.
Yeah. It's fascinating, folks, and it is iterative. It takes steps to go from that tightly woven, stable fabric that was the vest or the shirt or whatever it was, and to come back out in the form that it does. There's some machines down there with some pretty gnarly looking teeth on them that help do that.
Everything in our facility looks very menacing, but it's really not.
It actually does not. You have some clever names, which we won't get into here, but you've done a good job of naming them. And your facility is also very, very clean. We talked about the air filtration system a little bit, but when you're talking about working with fibers in that way and the people who are there engaging in it every day, but it's very clean. And maybe talk about the filtration a little bit, because you can even reuse what the filter catches.
That's right. Yes, well, first of all, thank you. That is compliments to our team. We have an amazing team, but the system design as well. Things move around in a series of ductwork, so we're not having open fibers flying through the air as you would kind of imagine. The system itself looks a little bit more kind of like a Willy Wonka or something. And with that, we have a filtration process that as it moves through the system and moves through our ductwork, goes through filtration of 5 different filter levels, so that when we pump air back out of the building, it's going out cleaner than it came in. And we even cap that in the wintertime, and that, because that air is warm, it heats our building for us.
Yeah, that's great. One of the other things I loved, we talked about your workforce a little bit, and you mentioned a minute ago the manual deconstruction process that folks go through. But one of the things I loved learning about was how you're cross-training those folks to ensure that there's opportunity for their own personal growth and development, but also, if you expand and use more AI and robotics, it's not to replace people. You want those people to be able to
That's right.
Do something else. So maybe touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's right. We have people that started with us that were really literally in the manual sortation or manual deconstruction, who previously had worked in CNC operations as a machine operator or something like that. It's really helpful to learn the process from the ground up, and then we're now cross-training those people into some fairly complex equipment that has some fairly, significant consequences if something goes wrong. If you're not paying attention, we really need to understand the process, and so as we do that, the goal is to train people up for multiple reasons. First of all, we want people to not be mundanely bored with the repetitive nature of doing something for multiple hours a day. Second part of it is that, we know that things happen. Somebody gets sick or calls out, and we want to have people who really know how to fill in on things like that. And then the third part of it is our growth strategy. I mean, we're running one shift right now, and there's a growth pattern here of these people becoming the leaders of the next shifts. And so it's always, we're a certified B Corp, and I've always believed that business has a responsibility beyond profitability. Not that excludes profitability, but it needs to be beyond that, to where we're doing good things for people and we're doing good things for the planet. And so we live that and really try and work hard on that so that the people that are here do have pathways forward.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I think something that is often unsung in, policy circles, it's about some, not all, some policymakers hear business and immediately think, their only motivation is profit. Well, I mean, there isn't anything wrong with that being a motivation, because that's what keeps businesses.
No, we very much like profit.
Yeah, and so too should the people who get tax revenue based on profits, and the people who can be hired, because profits can be reinvested in new jobs and expansion. But I will not bore you with that. But I think that this is often lost, that a lot, businesses are in the business of innovating and solving problems, and they want their workers to be healthy and happy and engaged, and they want their communities to be safe and healthy and happy. So they invest in their workers and their communities. And, you guys live that every day, but I think a lot of companies do and don't get credit for it. So.
Well, we do it because it's the right thing to do. I very early on had one of my advisory board mentors who said, "No margin, no mission." So you can create a business that does all kinds of good things, but if you're not making any money, it's not doing anything. So we very much value that profitability to be able to do the things that we need to do for daily operations. But then the next level up is to be able to expand that out and do more things. We've, in our first year of operation here, we've had, I think, no less than 25 school groups come through the facility, just educating folks on what happens with your clothes at the end of the day and how do they get turned back into something that is going to be clothes again.
That is very cool. I love that. You moved into this building not terribly long ago. Again, we said 90,000 square feet. There's room for growth. That was part of the vision when you were looking for a new facility. I know that wasn't an easy process for you to do. And, tell us a little, as much as you're kind of willing to, about, what were the challenges you were running into as you were sitting in Portland trying to figure out how to grow and looking for a place to do that?
Well, first of all, I think one of the main concerns around that is that we'd been doing something for a long time, and then we were going out and convincing people we needed to do the next thing in the process. And so when you're out waving around a PowerPoint or something like that, it's an idea, right? And there's not a lot of people that are willing to build the bridge, but plenty of people willing to walk across it when it's built. So we were fortunate enough to find a lot of really good support for that from our network to be able to make the expansion jump that we needed to. And then from there, it became, where are we going to put this? And what are the needs of the building? How are we going to do that? And, that became a really challenging piece of the puzzle for us, because as I said earlier, I'm a native Oregonian. I'd like to stay in Oregon. I wanted this to be, for us, as this company grows out and does what it's supposed to do and have the impact on a $3 trillion industry that we hope to have on it. I wanted that to come from Oregon, and so we on purpose say we're from Gresham, Oregon, because I want Gresham to be the Beaverton to Nike relationship. Nike is in Beaverton and Looptworks is in Gresham, and we're proud of that. And but to get to Gresham was complicated. It was difficult to get and stay in Oregon. We had recruitment conversations with a bunch of different states. We were almost leaving the state with better economic terms in a lot of places. And we ended up staying here primarily because we found a building owner that gave us a really good deal on the building that fit us really nicely. And it allowed us to transition a little bit more smoothly. But that was the reason we stayed. It wasn't anything that we were, there was no economic incentives or anything, any support from anybody. We had City of Portland saying, well, we hope you stick around. And that was, kind of the results of conversations with the mayor at the time.
Wow. And you're still getting those recruiting calls.
We are.
Yeah. And it makes sense what you're doing. It is like you said, you're doing a disruptive technology to benefit a $3 trillion industry. And people are excited about that naturally, and other states are excited about that and wanting to lure you away. So as an Oregonian, I would like to thank you for staying. I know that those are not easy choices.
There's definitely a line in the sand that won't be able to say no to. You're starting to see economic development coming very hard from other states who have big grant dollars to have this kind of infrastructure. And really, we're an infrastructure piece of the puzzle. This is something that you will start to see as the third or fourth largest material stream going into landfills and the fastest growing stream of material going into landfill that we're diverting out of landfill. That's an infrastructure requirement. And we have folks to the north, folks to the south, and folks to the east of us that have all expressed interest in having that kind of infrastructure, and they're willing to pay for it. And, this entire time we've done, little old Looptworks has done the lift, right? And we're up, we're running, we're operating. We have, we're making some pretty significant impacts already in our first 14 months of operation. But it comes a time when you need a little bit more support behind the wheel, and it would be great if Oregon can figure that out.
Yeah, and I think, don't worry, everyone, I'm not going to take you down a huge rabbit hole here on my spiel. You all know it, but I think there's two sides of this too. There's the competitive investments those opportunities like the grants or the incentive programs that aren't giveaways. They're an ROI for those states. There's a return on investment for states that do that. That's why they do it. They don't do it to give money away. They do it to lure in and grow economic activity. So there's that. We're not very good at that.
Mm-hmm.
We are, in fact, just not competitive in that at all. And then at the same time, we do things that make it even more costly to operate here, more complicated, where some of the end goals of policies or regulations might be good and widely agreed upon, but we make it pretty freaking difficult to navigate that system. And when you're someone like you who has an idea and wants to go out and try to innovate, you have to navigate these really complicated tax, employment, environmental, permitting, land. I mean, it's not just one area, it's layers of that. And so we make it both more costly and complicated, and we don't play in the competitive space. So it's like, ouch.
Well, I think there's maybe even there's another piece to that as well, which is, as I mentioned, the states that are courting are coming because of infrastructure. So, I'll give you an example of Washington to the north. King County's landfill is set to close in 8 years now. They know that they have to find solutions for diversion. And they know that having infrastructure to divert locally is going to be a lot less expensive than the alternative. So you start to look at those types of things and you start to plan what are the basic things. I've just often said that if we here in Oregon could get back to the nuts and bolts of potholes and the crime and the basics, just if we can get back to those basics, you also need to incorporate into that what are the basic infrastructures we're going to need and how do we plan for that? And so I think it's a little bit of those two things that need to come together, plus those two things plus what you mentioned that all need to kind of come together.
Yeah, you're right. It's that long-term planning, which we tend to not do very well in a number of spaces, and maybe that's because we get very distracted trying to be all things to all people right now, which we end up not being very good at because no one is. And meanwhile, we're losing sight of the basics, the maintenance, the things, and what the basics and maintenance are going to be in 10, 20 years. I was in a conversation yesterday with some folks on the coast about some of their infrastructure needs, and it was very similar. So I think you're spot on. Which is,
I'm speaking honestly about this, it's very counterintuitive for what Oregon has been.
Correct.
Because we had the visionaries, the Ton McCalls, and all the folks that have been out there, the Veracats, and everybody who's been out there really kind of looking at the future, and looking at a light rail to be able to commute into Portland, and looking at, Governor Kulingowski's marine reserves that protect our Oregon coast, all the things that we value as Oregonians and all the work that McCall did. We have this vision of how do we not only fix or do the things we need to do right here and today, but how do we protect for the next generation? And that's where I think we're not getting the things that we need to do today done, and it's distracted from the long-term vision.
Yeah, that's very well said. I think you're right.
The other thing on economic development, and I think where we're the state has business processes or tax processes that are difficult on businesses. Economic development is not just, hey, give us some grant money, give us a tax incentive, those types of things. Economic development is also being the connector within the network of businesses within the state, and it is also being a business within the state where the state is supporting the local businesses and buying things from the local businesses, doing business with them, and recommending them to other people in the network. That is a huge part of economic development that seems to get lost these days with, well, we don't have any money for a grant, or we don't have any money for a tax incentive. And those are programs that have to get developed and go through policy and all of that. But there are things that can be done that if we start working as a community, as a state that is a community, I think we can really get some of that economic development moving, because it's shocking to see how many little opportunities are here of all these people that are out there doing really great work, but it's kind of siloed and we're not necessarily talking to each other.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you for adding that.
Absolutely.
Looptworks recently, as I mentioned, obtained the Global Recycling Standard certification. It's a big deal, but why don't you explain to listeners why it's a big deal?
Yeah, it is a big deal. And we'd heard from some of our customers that, they would like us to be GRS certified. And first of all, we couldn't do it until we had several months, like 9 months of operation under our belt to be able to provide the data from what we were doing. So we knew we had to wait on it, and our customers knew we had to wait on it. But then when we actually got certified, it's amazing the number of companies that have come out of the woodwork where their procurement departments have said, oh, you're GRS certified. I have a mandate to buy GRS certified. And you're right here. I can do that now. And so for us, it's opened a big window into things. But then the other piece of the puzzle is it allows us to track and trace where the fibers are going, which is a requirement that people are starting to ask for. We're really proud to say that our fiber is made in the USA. That has a country of origin of made in the USA on it. And so when it goes out of the country and comes back in as a different product, that has economic benefits in certain cases.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, congratulations on that accomplishment.
Thank you. It's again, that was a team thing. The team did an amazing job of really nailing down the process and everything that we needed to do.
Yeah, that's terrific. Well, we are about out of time. Is there anything, just any last thoughts you want to share, or what's next for the company to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, well, I'm cautiously optimistic and hoping that Oregon is moving forward in the way that it needs to move forward, and love the state, and I love the work that you guys do to help lobby for the businesses.
Thank you. I didn't put him up to that.
I was not paid to say that. Businesses need to do more. That's why we became a B Corp, and I think that it's our responsibility to do more. It doesn't mean that it's our responsibility to pay more to do more, and that's where we're getting with the state right now, and the way that the businesses are being taxed, and the way that it's made it difficult for even our employees who are, saying, hey, I've got to relocate and I'm living in Beaverton. I can't drive out to Gresham anymore, but can you help me find a place in Vancouver? When we've got factory employees that are saying, hey, I want to move to Vancouver, this is where Oregon's got to do a little bit better. I'm optimistic about that, but I really think it starts with an engine of driving economic development. And that is where this state really needs to take the lead. And I really value what you guys are doing to help push folks in that direction.
Thank you so much for those thoughts and for sharing the Looptworks story with us. We look forward to checking in a few years to see how much you've accomplished in another short amount of time. But listeners, that is all we have today. I'd like to thank Scott Hamlin, the Looptworks founder, for joining us today and telling us their story. Thank you for tuning in. As you know, the Oregon Business Matters podcast is a production of OBI, Oregon's statewide Chamber of Commerce. Our episodes can be found on all of the top podcast platforms, and you can find them on our website at OregonBusinessIndustry.com. Thank you very much.